The Yu-Gi-Oh card game constantly gets a bad rep for being one of those TCGs that's unkind to new players. This notion usually comes from aspects of the game such as the difficulty of comprehending its weird rulings, the overwhelming feeling of learning the numerous ways to special summon monsters, or the sheer intimidating nature of modern Yu-Gi-Oh! The point is, if you've never played Yu-Gi-Oh! Or haven't played in many years, getting back into it can sometimes feel borderline impossible. But worry not, that's where I come in. Hi, I'm Topsy and welcome to my channel. For today's video, we'll be focusing on the various ways to special summon monsters, more specifically the Pendulum summon. But before we get started though, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a like and consider subscribing. It's easy, free, and helps creators such as myself tremendously. But with that out of the way, let's jump in. Man, oh man, if it isn't the undisputed, unrivaled, most hated summoning mechanic in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! The Pendulum Summon. Pendulum monsters are single-handedly the most polarizing cards in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! And it's not even close. You see, I believe that all this unwarranted hatred and discomfort people feel towards pendulums usually comes from how overall different pendulums look and behave. The combination of both these features then leads to making pendulums feel like the black sheep of Yu-Gi-Oh! But what exactly is it about pendulums that make people pull out their pitchforks whenever they see them? Well, let's break it down a bit. Pendulums are monsters that are simultaneously treated as both a monster and a spell, but get different effects depending on the zone they're placed in. This feature alone is already too much for many players to handle, since as we all know, Yu-Gi-Oh! Players can't read. Jokes aside, in addition to just how different they look, they also have some very weird and non-intuitive interactions with the grave, the spell and trap card zone, and finally, the extra deck. Taking everything I've said so far into account, it kinda makes sense and we start getting a picture as to why exactly pendulums have such a bad reputation. And in my personal opinion, I think this kinda sucks, since I think they're pretty cool and kinda fun to play, at least once you give them a chance. But enough chit chat, let's actually get into covering what and how pendulum monsters function. Part 1. What's a pendulum? So, what exactly are pendulums? Well, in short, the term pendulum refers to a special subtype a monster can have. This is unlike all the other extra deck mechanics we've covered in the past videos, and more resembles cards like tuners and spirit monsters. I say this resembles more spirits and tuners since pendulum cards can pretty much be seen in every type of monster in the game. We currently have normal pendulums, main deck effect pendulums, fusions, rituals, synchros, and even Xyz pendulum monsters, with the only current exception being links. This pretty much means that pendulums are neither a main deck nor an extra deck mechanic specifically. They're kind of their own thing. Additionally, a special aspect pendulums have is that they're able to perform what's called a pendulum summon. The pendulum summon is categorized as a built-in special summon that does not start a chain when being performed. Now then, when we take a good look at a pendulum monster, we can see that they have quite a bit going on. For starters, these cards have what's referred to as pendulum scales, those being the red and blue crystal-like designs with the numbers next to them. The importance behind these scales is that they help facilitate the pendulum summon we just finished mentioning a second ago. Finally, the last big thing that stands out about these cards is the fact that they're two-toned, being half green to represent their spell side, and the second tone differentiating based on the type of monster they are. Now, it's important to know that the extra deck pendulum monsters still do remain in your extra deck, while the main deck pendulum monsters remain in your main deck at the start of a duel. We'll go more in depth on this specific thing when we start covering the pendulum summon specifically, but that's the bare bones explanation of pendulum monsters. That's all there is to them. So let's go ahead and start dissecting everything else in our next segment. Part 2. Dissecting the pendulum summon. Alright, so contrary to what you may think, the pendulum summon is actually a lot simpler than you might have originally thought. Here's how it works. First off, you, the player, are going to need two different pendulum monsters with different scales. The scales on these pendulum monsters are going to determine the levels of the monsters you're able to special summon. Now then, once you've acquired those two pendulum monsters, you're going to place them face up in the pendulum zone. Pendulum monsters are unable to be set in these zones, just so you know. Additionally, these pendulum zones I mentioned are going to be the two most outer zones in the spell and trap card zone. Keep in mind that these two specific zones are the only zones you're able to place your pendulum monsters face up. Now then, the order you place these scales doesn't actually matter. You can place the highest scale first or the low. This makes zero difference. Once you've accomplished this, you've set the stage to perform a pendulum summon. Now, once per turn, you're allowed to special summon as many monsters from your hand or face-up extra deck that fall between the levels or ranks of your scales. However, there are a couple of things to keep in mind. First, the monsters being pendulum summoned need to have their levels fall between the scale values of your monsters in the pendulum zone. This means that if you have a scale 1 and a scale 8 pendulum monster in the pendulum zone, you can only summon monsters within the levels or rank of 2 through 7. Monsters level 1 and 8 get excluded from this. Secondly, monsters summoned from the face-up extra deck need to be summoned into an extra monster zone or underneath an arrow a link monster points to. Don't worry, we'll get back to this whole idea later in the video. Finally, third, the pendulum summon does not ignore summoning restrictions. This means that you can't just special summon cards that can't be special summoned, or cards that need to meet a special summoning condition first. This includes cards like Rituals, Fusions, Synchros, and Xyz. But honestly, that's all there really is to the pendulum summon as a whole. It's that simple. But here's some additional information to keep in mind regarding the pendulum summon. As I said earlier in this video, this is a built-in summon, meaning that cards that can negate built-in summons, like Solemn Warning as an example, can completely negate an entire pendulum summon, regardless of how many monsters you're summoning. Additionally, cards like Imperial Order, Secret's Forest of the Spellcasters, or Anti-Spell Fragrance completely destroy pendulum monsters because pendulum monsters can't be set in the spell trap card zone, therefore not allowing them to set the scales. And lastly, whenever you're performing a pendulum summon, your opponent isn't able to interrupt it with card effects like Mystical Space Typhoon or Cosmic Cyclone, since they're not allowed to chain to the summon of a pendulum monster with these type of cards. If they wanted to interrupt you, they would have to instead preemptively pop the scales before the pendulum summon. But that's all there really is to the pendulum summon. Alright, let's move on to our next segment. Part 3. The field, the grave, and the extra deck. Arguably, one of the most complicated aspects of the pendulum monster is figuring out its interactions with the aforementioned field, grave, and extra deck. In case you're unfamiliar with what I'm alluding towards, pendulum monsters have unique features to them that sends them to the face-up extra deck, instead of just going to the graveyard whenever they're forced off the field. Of course, things don't always go this way. We're gonna go ahead and cover what happens to pendulums when they're sent to the graveyard from 5 separate locations. First off, we have from the monster zone itself. So, whenever you successfully summon a pendulum monster to the field, whether it was normal summoned or special summoned, it will always go to the extra deck whenever it's forced off the field, whether it's destroyed by battle, card effect, or just sent from field to grave. This includes pendulum monsters summoned from literally anywhere, whether it was pendulum summoned, normal summoned, special summoned from hand, special summoned from deck, special summoned from grave, special summon from the banish zone, it does not matter. As long as it hit the field and is forced off the field, it's gonna go to the extra deck, but does not include being bounced back to the hand or being spinned back into the deck. Now, since we're still talking about the field, let's address what happens to your pendulum monsters in the spell and trap card zone. If your pendulum monster is destroyed while in the spell and trap card zone, it's also sent to the extra deck every single time. This includes even if it was equipped to a monster. Hopefully we're seeing a pattern here. Essentially, if a pendulum monster is anywhere on the field and sent to the graveyard, it's going to be sent to the extra deck instead. How about from other locations though? Well, if you send a pendulum monster from your deck or your hand to the graveyard via a card effect like Foolish Burial, those pendulum monsters are sent straight to the graveyard and not the extra deck. Alright, so let's break down what we know so far. So as of right now, we know that if a pendulum card is sent from the field to the graveyard, it's sent to the extra deck instead. But if it's sent from anywhere else, it goes to the graveyard. But before we move on, there's 2 more scenarios that I want to address. Those being what happens when they're banished or used as Xyz material. Let's explore that idea. So whenever a pendulum monster is sent to the graveyard via any means, whether it's battle, card effect, or whatever, while a card like Dimension Shifter or Dark Law is on the field, it's always banished, even if it was on field when it happens. This is an absolute rule. Now, as for being used as Xyz material, this is also a scenario where they are sent straight to the graveyard because they technically aren't on the field, therefore not allowing them to be sent to the extra deck. As I said, this is a little less intuitive, but it's not like crazy complicated. So all you need to know about pendulum monsters and their interactions with the field and the graveyard is that a pendulum monster sent from the field to the grave, it's going to go to the extra deck. A pendulum monster that's sent from anywhere else, like the hand or the deck, to the grave, it's just going to go straight to the graveyard. And finally, whenever a card is face up on the field that banishes, your pendulum monsters are still going to be banished and not sent to the extra deck. And any pendulum monster that's used as an Xyz material is sent straight to the graveyard instead of being sent to the extra deck. That's all you really got to know, those 4 interactions. So hopefully after my explanation, you guys better understand how to identify whenever a pendulum monster is sent to the extra deck or the graveyard. So what's the significance behind a monster being sent to the face-up extra deck? So the face-up extra deck kind of works like a second graveyard that you can access every turn with the pendulum summon. And also, there are some rare occasions when pendulum monsters even have effects that can be activated while in the face-up extra deck. This isn't super common, but it can occur. But honestly, that's all there really is to that. It's just a unique feature that kind of behaves like an extra grave. That's it. Hopefully that explanation made sense to everyone, but if not, feel free to ask whatever question you may have about the pendulum mechanic in the comment section below. I'll make sure to answer everyone's question to the best of my ability. Alright, let's move on to our last segment of the day. Part 4. Pendulum effects versus monster effects. It's impossible to ignore the fact that pendulum monsters have 2 separate text boxes on them, that being their pendulum effect on the top and their monster effect on the bottom. What's important to know here is when each of these effects can be activated. For starters, the pendulum effect can only ever be activated while it's in the pendulum zone. This is the case always. However, what's more interesting to explore is when a pendulum's monster effect can be used. Of course, like all other monsters in the game, pendulums are able to activate their monster effects from pretty much anywhere, given that they meet the activation condition. Examples of this can be seen with cards like Supreme King Dragon Darkworm, using its effect from graveyard to special summon itself. We also have cards like Astrograph Sorcerer, that can activate its monster effect from hand to special summon itself as well. However, the most interesting interaction for me comes from cards like Double Iris and Purple Poison Magician, both being able to use their monster effect while in the pendulum zone. Okay. Here's the thing. I phrased that in a bit of a misleading way. A pendulum monster can't actually activate a monster effect while in the pendulum zone. Instead, what I was referring to is that both these cards have effects that activate upon being destroyed and can still trigger their effects if they were destroyed in the pendulum scale. I'll be honest with you guys, that's all there really is to this. It's that simple. Pendulum effects only go off in the pendulum zone, and monster effects can be triggered from anywhere, like all other monsters. Nothing changed. The only thing you have to keep in mind is the fact that they have one extra effect in the pendulum zone. That's it. And with that, that's the end of the video. I do hope you guys enjoyed your stay and learned something new, or at least understand the topic a little bit better. If you did, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a like and subscribe. But if not, let me know in the comments below. Was there something I missed, or is there another topic you'd like me to cover more in depth in a future video? But with that, I've been your pal Topsy. Thank you so much for stopping by and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.